We are taking over your lake house this weekend. 32 guests total. Leave the fridge stocked and the keys to your SUV on the counter. That was the text my mother sent me at 3 in the morning. She followed it up with a laughing emoji and the words, "You really think you can stop us?" I did not argue. I just replied with a single word. No. 3 days later, my father was screaming through the phone as police sirens wailed in the background, demanding to know why heavily armed men were escorting our entire extended family off my property. I am Allison, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As an emergency room trauma nurse, I spend my life saving people, but for years I could not save myself from my own parents. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build an iron wall to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you most. Growing up in our suburban neighborhood outside of Chicago meant keeping up appearances at all costs. To the outside world, we were the perfect American family. My father Richard was a charismatic salesman, and my mother Susan was the ultimate hostess. But behind the closed doors of our immaculate house, love was a currency, and I was perpetually overdrawn. Everything was reserved for my older brother Todd. Todd was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong even when he was failing classes and racking up credit card debt. I was just the reliable workhorse expected to clean up his messes and fund his lifestyle. That dynamic did not change when we became adults. It only got more expensive. But I had finally reached my breaking point. It was a Tuesday morning. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour overnight trauma shift at the hospital. My scrubs were stained, my feet felt like they were made of lead, and the lingering smell of clinical sanitizer was clinging to my hair. All I wanted was to step into my quiet apartment, take a hot shower, and sleep for the next 14 hours. I dropped my heavy work bag by the door and sank onto my living room sofa, pulling my phone from my pocket to set my alarm. That is when the screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. It was the family group chat. The messages had been pouring in since midnight. I opened the chat, my tired eyes straining against the bright screen. The first message was from my father. He wrote, "The whole extended family is meeting at the lake house this Friday for a 5-day family reunion. We have 32 people coming. Make sure the boat is gassed up." I stared at the screen, my exhaustion briefly replaced by sheer disbelief. The lake house he was casually referring to was a stunning waterfront property at the Lake of the Ozarks. It was not a family asset. I bought it entirely on my own 2 years ago, working double shifts and holidays to save every penny for the down payment. My parents had not contributed a single dime. In fact, they had openly mocked me for buying it, calling it a foolish financial decision, right up until they saw the photos of the wraparound deck and the private dock. The next message was from my mother. "Susan wrote, Allison, we need you to drive up on Thursday and fill the fridge. Get the expensive steaks Todd likes, and make sure you buy enough champagne for the adults. Do not be selfish and ruin this weekend for everyone. Just behave for once." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Do not be selfish. That was my mother's favorite phrase whenever she wanted to steal my time or my money. It was the exact same phrase she used 10 years ago when she demanded I empty my savings account to pay for Todd's disastrous destination wedding, a marriage that ended in divorce exactly 8 months later. As if on cue, Todd chimed into the group chat. He wrote, "Hey Al, I am bringing 5 of my buddies. We are going to need your SUV to haul our golf clubs and the coolers. Just leave the keys on the kitchen island. You can take the bus back to the city. Thanks." I sat there in the dim light of my living room, letting the sheer audacity of their demands wash over me. 32 people, demanding my house, demanding my car, demanding I pay for their luxury groceries. And not a single one of them had bothered to ask if it was okay. They simply announced their invasion, fully expecting me to roll over and comply like I had done for the first 30 years of my life. My chest tightened. The old Allison, the one desperate for a scrap of parental approval, would have panicked. She would have driven to the grocery store on zero sleep, maxed out her credit card on premium steaks, and handed over the keys to her only vehicle just to keep the peace. She would have spent the weekend hiding in the master bedroom while 32 relatives trashed her sanctuary. But that Allison was gone. She died the day I realized my family did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me. I looked at the final message from my mother, the one with the laughing emoji taunting me. "You really think you can stop us?" My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I did not write a paragraph explaining my boundaries. I did not justify my exhaustion or cite my property rights. I did not remind them that Todd still owed me $15,000 from a defaulted loan he secretly opened in my name. Explanations were for people who respected logic. My family only respected force. I typed a single word, "No." I hit send. Then, without waiting for the inevitable explosion of angry replies, I went into my phone settings and blocked all 3 of their numbers. I turned on Do Not Disturb mode, tossed the phone onto the coffee table, and walked toward my bedroom. The silence that followed was not the heavy, anxious silence I used to feel when I disappointed them. It was the light, crisp silence of absolute freedom. But I knew my parents. I knew a simple no would not stop them. My father's ego was too massive, and my mother had already promised a free luxury vacation to 32 relatives. They were going to show up at my property fully intending to break in if they had to, just to prove they owned me. They thought I was just being stubborn. They thought I would eventually cave. They had no idea that before I went to sleep that morning, I opened my laptop and finalized a very special ironclad rental agreement. I was not just locking them out. I was setting a trap they would never forget. As I stood under the hot water of my shower, washing away the grime of the hospital, my mind was running through the logistics. I owned the house free and clear. The smart locks were controlled by an app on my phone. The security gate at the front of the driveway was made of reinforced steel. I had installed it specifically because I valued my privacy, something my family fundamentally despised. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and booted up my computer. For the past month, a private corporate security firm had been inquiring about leasing my lake house for an executive team building retreat. They needed a secure, isolated location with modern amenities, and they were willing to pay a premium. I had been hesitant to rent it out, wanting to keep my sanctuary untouched. But reading those text messages changed everything. I pulled up the emails, found the contact for the security firm's logistics coordinator, and typed a quick message. I told him the house was theirs for the next 7 days, starting immediately. I offered them a 20% discount on the weekly rate if they could move in their advance team by Thursday morning. The coordinator replied within 5 minutes, "Contract signed, deposit transferred." The advance team, consisting of 12 ex-military security contractors, would be on site to secure the perimeter before noon on Thursday. I smiled at the confirmation screen. My parents thought they were going to bully their way into a free vacation. Instead, they were going to drive 5 hours with a caravan of demanding relatives, only to face a dozen highly trained security professionals who did not take kindly to trespassers. I closed the laptop, climbed into my bed, and pulled the heavy duvet over my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of my family's rage. I was looking forward to it. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing that the dominoes had finally been pushed, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop the collapse. When I woke up late that Tuesday afternoon, the heavy blackout curtains in my bedroom had done their job perfectly. I felt rested for the first time in days. I walked into my kitchen, the cold hardwood floor grounding me, and started the espresso machine. The rich, bitter smell of dark roast filled the apartment as I pulled my iPad from the kitchen drawer. I had blocked my parents and my brother on my phone, but I knew they would find another way to reach me. They always did. Sure enough, the screen lit up with 6 new notifications from Facebook Messenger. Susan had taken her campaign digital. I took a slow sip of my coffee and opened the messages. My mother had typed a sprawling, emotionally manipulative paragraph. She wrote, "Allison, you are acting completely unhinged. Your father is extremely stressed about this trip, and you are intentionally ruining the family vibe. Why do you always have to be the difficult one? You have always held this irrational grudge against your brother. It is just like when you intentionally ruined Todd's college graduation by refusing to show up. You are a bitter person, and you need to fix this attitude before Friday. I read the words again. Intentionally ruin Todd's college graduation. I set the iPad on the marble counter and let out a sharp breath. The audacity was breathtaking. I walked into my bedroom and pulled my black duffel bag from the closet, setting it on the mattress to pack for my upcoming stretch of shifts. I grabbed a fresh pair of scrubs, my stethoscope, and my compression socks. As I folded them, my mind flashed back to the reality of that graduation weekend 5 years ago. I did not miss Todd's graduation because I was bitter. I missed it because I was working a mandatory 72-hour rotation at the hospital. I had to take every available overtime shift because my bank account had been drained entirely. 3 months before Todd walked across that stage to receive his business degree, I received a notice in the mail from a debt collection agency. It was for a $15,000 private student loan in my name, a loan I had never applied for. Todd had forged my signature and used my social security number to secure the funds during his sophomore year. He used the money to lease a luxury sports car and fund his fraternity spring break trips. When he defaulted on the payments, the creditors came after me. As a registered nurse, having a massive collection action and potential wage garnishment on my record could have triggered a review of my professional license. I had panicked. I confronted my parents, sobbing and begging them to make Todd pay it back. My father had simply rolled his eyes and told me not to make a mountain out of a molehill. My mother had patted my arm and said, "Todd is just finding his footing, Allison. Do not destroy his future over a little mistake. You have a good job, just pay it off, and we will figure it out later." There was no later. They never paid me back a single cent. I spent the entire weekend of his graduation cleaning up blood-setting fractures and holding the hands of dying patients in the ER just to keep my credit score from completely tanking. And now Susan was using that exact trauma to paint me as the villain of the family. I tossed my toiletries bag into the duffel and zipped it shut with a sharp, satisfying snap. The guilt they had programmed into me since childhood was completely gone. I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed my iPad, and opened my smart home security application. It was time to initiate the final phase of my countermeasure. The interface loaded, showing a live feed of the lake house. The property sat perfectly still under the afternoon sun, the water sparkling in the background. I tapped the primary control settings. First, I disabled the master keypad on the front door, wiping Todd and my father's fingerprints from the biometric scanner. Next, I completely deactivated the guest access codes my mother loved to give out to her friends. Finally, I engaged the override lock on the steel driveway gate, syncing it exclusively to the temporary access codes I had generated for the security firm. I watched the live camera feed as a convoy of 3 black unmarked SUVs pulled onto the rural road leading to my property. The corporate security advance team had arrived right on schedule. The vehicles stopped at the steel gate. I saw a man in tactical gear step out of the lead vehicle and approach the keypad. He entered the temporary code I had provided. The heavy steel gate slid open smoothly, welcoming them into the compound. I smiled a genuine, relaxed smile and closed the application. The house was no longer mine for the next 7 days. It was a heavily guarded corporate asset. I finished the last drop of my espresso, rinsed the mug in the sink, and grabbed my keys. I had another trauma shift to get to, and I needed to focus on saving lives. My family's artificial crisis was no longer my problem. I knew the storm was coming, but for the first time I was the one controlling the weather. I walked out of my apartment, locked the door behind me, and headed to the hospital, completely prepared for the Wednesday morning chaos that was about to unfold. Wednesday morning arrived exactly as I anticipated. I was sitting in the sterile hospital break room nursing a lukewarm cup of cafeteria coffee after another brutal 12-hour shift in the trauma unit. The digital clock on the microwave read 8 in the morning. Right on cue, my phone vibrated violently against the laminate table. The caller ID flashed my father's name, Richard. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let the phone ring 3 times to establish complete control of the situation, and finally pressed accept. Before I could even say hello, my father's voice exploded through the speaker. "Allison, what the hell is wrong with your security gate? The keypad is completely dead and my master code is not working. Through the receiver, I could hear the chaotic, beautiful symphony of his predicament. Car horns were honking impatiently. Todd's obnoxious sports exhaust was revving in the background. Children were whining loudly about needing to use the bathroom. I could hear my mother Susan shrieking at someone to keep the dogs inside the truck because the pavement was already getting too hot. I kept my voice perfectly level, utilizing the exact clinical tone I usually reserved for panicked patients in the emergency room. There is nothing wrong with the gate, Dad. The system is functioning exactly as I programmed it. There was a brief, stunning silence on his end of the line. The heavy realization hit him, followed immediately by a surge of embarrassed rage. What do you mean you programmed it? Open this gate right now. I have 8 vehicles lined up behind me on a narrow gravel shoulder. Your Aunt Diane and Uncle Greg drove all the way from Ohio for this. Todd and his friends are sweating in their car. We have 32 people baking in the morning sun. My father was a man who lived entirely for his public image. For months, he had been bragging to the extended family about the luxurious lakefront compound he was graciously providing for the family reunion. He had promised them private boat rides on a pristine lake, catered dinners on a wraparound deck, and unlimited access to what he heavily implied was a shared family asset that he controlled. Now the great wealthy patriarch was standing on a dusty rural road, locked out by his own daughter, in front of his entire captive audience. I leaned back in my plastic break room chair. I told you on Tuesday that I was not hosting you. You chose to ignore my text. Allison stopped throwing a childish tantrum. You are embarrassing me in front of the entire family. Press the button on your little phone application and open this gate before I completely lose my temper. I could picture the scene perfectly. His face flushed a deep angry red. His jaw clenched tightly, pacing back and forth in front of the heavy steel bars, while 32 relatives watched from their idling cars, whispering to each other, wondering why the generous host could not access his own property. I am not throwing a tantrum, Dad. I am enforcing a boundary. You do not own that house. You did not ask to use it. You demanded it. And now you are facing the direct consequences of your own staggering entitlement. I heard a scuffle over the line as Susan aggressively snatched the phone from him. I could hear the sharp click of her acrylic nails tapping against the speaker. Allison, this is your mother. You are ruining the family reunion. You are going to let us in right this second, or I swear to God you are no longer part of this family. The empty threat hung in the air. 10 years ago, that exact sentence would have sent me into a devastating spiral of anxiety. I would have done anything to avoid being cast out. Today, it sounded like the greatest gift she could possibly offer me. Are you promising me that, Mom? Because that sounds like a fantastic deal on my end. She gasped, genuinely shocked that her ultimate weapon of emotional manipulation had misfired so completely. You ungrateful brat. We drove 5 hours. Todd took time off work for this. Then you have a 5-hour drive back to Chicago, I replied smoothly. Or you can find a hotel that can accommodate 32 people at the last minute. But you are not stepping foot on my property. The phone shuffled again and my father was back on the line. His voice had dropped an octave into a menacing, calculated growl. He was done trying to play the victim. Listen to me very carefully, Allison. I have a heavy-duty steel toe strap in the back of my truck. I am going to hitch it to this gate and rip it straight off the concrete hinges. You are going to be paying thousands of dollars in property repairs, all because you could not learn your place and respect your parents. Now are you going to open it remotely, or do I have to force my way in and deal with you later? This was the exact moment I had been waiting for. The moment his arrogance pushed him right over the edge into territory he could not retreat from. I took another calm sip of my coffee, feeling a wide smile spread across my face. Go ahead, Dad. Hook up your truck. But before you step on the gas, you might want to look at the 3 black SUVs parked in the driveway on the other side of that gate. I could hear a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The sound of a heavy truck door slamming echoed through the tiny speaker as my father presumably stepped out of his vehicle to get a better look through the reinforced steel bars of my driveway gate. Whose vehicles are those, Allison? He demanded. His voice had dropped, the aggressive bravado replaced instantly by a thick layer of genuine confusion. Did you rent my house out to someone else? I took a slow breath, savoring the absolute absurdity of his question. First of all, Dad, it is my house, not yours. My name is on the deed, my money paid the mortgage, and my name is on the property tax forms. And yes, I did rent it out. Since you gave me such incredibly short notice about your little family reunion, I decided to make other arrangements to protect my asset. The property is currently under a strict 7-day lease to a private corporate security firm. They are using the grounds for an executive team-building retreat. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the fact that his ultimate power play had just been completely neutralized. For his entire life, my father operated on the assumption that if he shouted loud enough and demanded hard enough, everyone around him would simply fold. It had worked on my mother. It had worked on my brother. And for 30 years, it had worked on me. "You are lying!" Susan yelled in the background, her voice shrill and desperate as she leaned toward the phone. "She is bluffing Richard. She just parked some rental cars in the driveway to scare us away. Get the heavy crowbar from the toolbox. We are not letting her ruin this weekend. Aunt Diane is already walking up to the window asking why we are stopped." I chuckled softly into the receiver, the sound cold and hollow even to my own ears. "I would highly advise against that, Dad. Those are not rental cars. There are currently 12 ex-military security contractors inside that house. They arrived yesterday afternoon to secure the perimeter and set up their equipment. They take their privacy very seriously, and they have incredibly strict instructions regarding trespassers. If you try to force that gate open with a crowbar or your tow strap, you will not be dealing with me. You will be dealing with a dozen highly trained professionals who do not care that you are my father." "Allison, this is not funny," my father barked, though I could finally detect the slight frantic tremor of panic in his voice. "You need to call these people right now and tell them there has been a massive scheduling mistake. Tell them to pack up their gear and leave immediately. I have 32 people sitting in the hot sun. Todd has his friends with him. Your Uncle Greg drove all the way from Ohio with his boat attached to his truck. You are making me look like a fool in front of my own family." "You did that to yourself," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level, utilizing the exact clinical tone I used when delivering bad news in the trauma ward. "You invited 32 people to a property you do not own without having the basic decency to ask the actual owner. You promised them a luxury vacation on my dime to boost your own ego. I am simply enforcing the reality of the situation. The house is legally leased. The contract is ironclad. There is absolutely nothing I can do, and even if there was, I would not do it." Through the phone, I could hear the murmurs of the extended family starting to grow louder. Relatives were rolling down their car windows, stepping out onto the dusty gravel shoulder, and asking what the holdup was. Todd's voice cut through the noise, complaining loudly that the ice in his premium coolers was melting and his friends were getting annoyed with the heat. Todd always hated being inconvenienced. My father was trapped in a prison of his own making. He could not turn around and admit to the extended family that he had boldly lied about owning the lake house. He could not admit that his daughter, the one he constantly belittled and treated like a personal bank account, had completely outsmarted him. His ego simply would not allow him to retreat gracefully. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little brat," he hissed, dropping his voice low so the relatives gathering behind him would not hear the panic in his words. "I am not going to let you humiliate me today. I am the patriarch of this family. What I say goes. I am going to pop the trunk, get my steel crowbar, and I am going to pry that electronic lock right off the concrete pillar. When I get inside, I am going to throw your little renters out by the scruff of their necks." "Dad, I am warning you right now," I said, leaning forward in my plastic break room chair. "Do not touch that gate. You are not dealing with a scared teenager you can bully into submission anymore. You are dealing with a corporate entity that holds a legally binding lease on private property. If you damage that gate, you are committing a felony. If you cross that property line, you are formally trespassing." "I do not care about your fake lease," he roared, finally losing whatever shred of composure he had left. The facade of the wealthy, generous host was crumbling fast. I am going to rip that gate open, and I am going to make you pay for every single cent of the damages out of your own pocket. You have pushed me too far this time, Allison." The sound of the phone fumbling and the heavy thud of a truck tailgate dropping confirmed he was actually going through with it. He was so blinded by his own arrogance, so accustomed to getting his way through brute force, that he truly believed he could physically overpower a corporate security detail just by throwing a tantrum. It was the exact same mindset he used when he forced me to take out loans for Todd, assuming I would just absorb the damage to keep the family intact. "Richard, wait," I heard my mother say, her voice suddenly laced with genuine hesitation and fear. "What if she is not bluffing? Look at those guys coming out of the house." Through the receiver, I heard the distinct heavy crunch of tactical boots walking across the gravel driveway on the other side of the gate. The security firm's perimeter alarms must have alerted them to the commotion at the entrance. I took a final sip of my lukewarm coffee, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace wash over my tired body. The old Allison would have been paralyzed with guilt, begging them to stop before they got arrested. The new Allison was perfectly content to just sit back and listen to the consequences unfold. "I will let you go, Dad," I said smoothly. "It sounds like you have some guests to greet. Have a wonderful family reunion." I ended the call, placed my phone face down on the break room table, and let out a long, slow breath. The chaos was no longer mine to manage. The boundary was set, the trap was fully sprung, and my father was about to learn a very hard, very public lesson about respect. I kept my phone face down on the break room table for exactly 10 seconds before my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it back up, opened my smart home application, and tapped on the live feed for the front gate security camera. I needed to see this for myself. The high-definition camera provided a perfect wide-angle view of the rural road. My father's silver pickup truck was idling aggressively in front of the reinforced steel gate. Behind his truck, a long line of vehicles was backed up along the dusty shoulder. I could see Aunt Diane fanning herself in the passenger seat of Uncle Greg's SUV. Todd was leaning against the hood of his sports car, scrolling on his phone, looking completely oblivious to the felony our father was about to commit. Todd had brought 3 of his friends with him, and they were standing in the gravel looking hot, annoyed, and deeply unimpressed with the luxury vacation they had been promised. My father stomped around to the back of his truck. He was putting on a massive show for his captive audience. He threw his tailgate down with a loud metallic bang that I could hear clearly through the camera's audio feed. He dragged out a thick, bright, yellow, heavy-duty tow strap. Susan was standing a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, looking nervously back and forth between the imposing gate and the relatives watching them. "Richard, please just wait," my mother pleaded, her voice picking up on the audio feed. "Let us just call a locksmith. We can tell everyone you lost the master key. Do not break the gate." My father ignored her. His face was a mask of pure, stubborn rage. He was a man who had never been told no, and his brain was short-circuiting at the very concept of a boundary. He hooked one end of the heavy metal carabiner to the tow hitch of his truck. Then he marched up to my beautiful, expensive driveway gate and wrapped the other end of the strap around the center steel pillar, securing it tightly. He turned back to the family, waving his arms in a grand, theatrical gesture. "Everybody stand back," he shouted, making sure his voice carried down the line of cars. "The electronic lock is jammed. I'm going to pop it open so we can get this family reunion started." A few of the younger cousins cheered. Uncle Greg gave him a thumbs up. They actually believed him. They had no idea they were about to witness the spectacular, very public destruction of his ego. My father climbed back into the driver's seat of his truck. Through the camera feed, I watched the exhaust pipes spew a thick cloud of dark smoke as he revved the engine. The truck lurched forward. The bright yellow tow strap pulled taut, snapping straight with a violent jerk. The heavy-duty tires spun against the loose gravel, kicking up a massive cloud of dust that drifted back over the line of waiting family members. The truck strained forward, the engine roaring loudly. But the steel gate did not even flinch. I had paid a premium for those reinforced concrete hinges. Suddenly, the screech of spinning tires was drowned out by a sound that made me smile into my coffee cup. It was the security firm's perimeter breach alarm. It was not a standard quiet home security chime. It was an industrial ear-piercing siren designed to disorient and intimidate intruders. The sound ripped through the quiet morning air, echoing loudly across the lake and shaking the leaves on the nearby trees. On the screen, the reaction was instantaneous. Several younger children in the back of the family minivans started crying in terror. Todd dropped his phone in the dirt, covering his ears, while his friends backed away in alarm. My mother stumbled backward, her face turning pale with genuine shock as she clamped her hands over her ears. My father slammed on the brakes, the truck jerking to a harsh halt. He threw the door open and stepped out, looking wildly around for the source of the deafening noise. Then the front door of the lake house swung open. Two men stepped out onto the gravel driveway, walking purposefully toward the gate. They were not wearing standard security uniforms. They were dressed in dark tactical clothing, heavy boots and utility belts. They moved with the calm, terrifying precision of men who had spent years operating in hostile environments. They were massive, imposing, and completely unbothered by the screaming alarm. One of the men tapped a device on his wrist, and the ear-piercing siren abruptly cut off, leaving a ringing, heavy silence in its wake. My father stood frozen next to his truck, his hand still resting on the open door. The confident, wealthy patriarch act vanished instantly, replaced by the posture of a man who suddenly realized he was completely out of his depth. The lead contractor stopped about 3 feet from the gate, crossing his thick, muscular arms over his chest. He looked at the yellow toe strap wrapped around the pillar, then looked directly at my father. His voice was deep, authoritative, and carried easily over the camera microphone. "Disconnect that strap and step away from the gate," immediately the contractor ordered. My father blinked, trying desperately to summon his usual aggressive bluster. He puffed out his chest and took a step forward, grabbing the steel bars of the gate. "Now you listen to me," he barked, pointing a finger at the massive man. "This is my property. I am hosting a family reunion here today. I do not know who you think you are, but you are trespassing. Open this gate right now before I call the local police." The contractor did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He simply stared at my father with a look of absolute clinical boredom. "Sir," the contractor said smoothly, "you do not own this property. The legal owner is a woman named Allison, and she has leased this entire compound to our firm for a private executive retreat. We have the deed and the lease agreement on file. You are currently attempting to destroy private property and breach a secured perimeter. You have exactly 10 seconds to remove that strap from the gate before we escalate this situation." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The silence from the audience of relatives was deafening. 32 people were hanging on every single word. They had just heard, completely unfiltered, that the beautiful lake house did not belong to Richard. They heard that the owner was Allison, the daughter he constantly belittled and treated like a personal assistant. And they heard that he had absolutely no right to be there. My father's face turned a shade of bright, blotchy purple. He looked back at the line of cars. Aunt Diane was staring at him with her mouth hanging open. Uncle Greg had stepped out of his SUV and was frowning deeply, his arms crossed, clearly realizing they had been dragged 5 hours into a massive, humiliating lie. Todd was staring at the ground, his face burning red, as his friends started whispering and laughing behind him. "You are lying," my father yelled, though his voice cracked slightly. "My daughter is confused. She is just acting out. This is a family matter." The second contractor stepped forward, sliding a heavy black radio off his utility belt. "This is not a family matter, sir. This is an attempted breaking and entering. I am giving you one final warning. Remove the strap." My father hesitated. I could see the internal battle playing out on his face. If he removed the strap, he was admitting defeat in front of his entire family. He was admitting he was a fraud who had lied to impress them. But if he refused, he was going to be physically dealt with by 2 men who looked like they could fold his truck in half. For a moment, he actually looked like he was going to argue again. He opened his mouth to yell another threat. But my mother rushed forward, grabbing his arm tightly, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "Richard, stop it," she hissed urgently, her voice trembling. "People are staring. You are making a scene in front of Diane and Greg. Just take the strap off. We will deal with Allison later." With a furious, shaking hand, my father unhooked the carabiner from the steel pillar. He threw the heavy yellow strap into the bed of his truck with a loud, aggressive clatter, puffing out his chest one last time, as if trying to pretend it was his own decision to back down. The lead contractor nodded slowly. Very smart decision. Now I suggest you and your convoy turn those vehicles around and clear this rural road. If you remain parked near this perimeter for another 5 minutes, we will contact the local authorities and have your vehicles impounded. My father did not respond. He could not. The humiliation was absolute. He climbed back into his truck and slammed the door so hard the entire vehicle shook. I watched as the contractors turned their backs on him and walked calmly back toward the house, completely dismissing his existence. My father was left sitting in his idling truck, trapped at the front of a long line of confused, angry relatives who were now stepping out of their cars and demanding answers. I locked my phone screen, slipped it into my scrub pocket, and stood up from the break room table. My 15-minute break was over. I had patients waiting for me in trauma room 3. As I walked down the bright, sterile hallway of the hospital, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation expanding in my chest. It was not anxiety. It was not the crushing guilt my parents had spent 30 years programming into me. It was the absolute euphoric feeling of total control. I knew the fallout from this morning was going to be massive, and I knew my father's ego would force him to retaliate in the worst way possible. But I was ready for it. The first domino had completely crushed him, and I knew the next one was already falling. 2 hours passed before the next wave of chaos hit. I had just finished stabilizing a patient in trauma room 3, washing the iodine and medical scrub off my hands, when my phone vibrated intensely against my hip. I dried my hands on a paper towel, pulled the phone from my pocket, and looked at the screen. The caller ID did not show a family member this time. It displayed the official number for the local county sheriff's department near the lake house. I took a deep breath, letting the steady rhythm of the hospital emergency department ground me, and pressed accept. "Is this Allison?" a stern, deep voice asked. "This is she. My name is Deputy Harrison. I am currently standing on a rural road outside a gated property. I am here responding to a distress call made by your father, Richard." I leaned against the cool tile wall of the hallway. "And what exactly is the nature of his distress, Deputy?" "Your father called 911 to report a domestic disturbance and a potential psychiatric emergency." The deputy explained, his tone carefully, neutral but carrying an undercurrent of tension. "He informed us that you are an emergency room nurse who has been working severe overtime and that the stress has caused you to suffer a severe manic episode. He stated that you have changed the locks on a shared family vacation property in a paranoid state, trapping a private security detail inside, and leaving your entire extended family stranded on the side of the road. He requested that we breach the gate to secure the property and conduct a welfare check on you." The sheer, breathtaking manipulation of his lie hit me like a physical blow. My father was not just trying to bully his way into a free vacation anymore. He was actively weaponizing my demanding career and falsely claiming I was having a mental health crisis just to get a police officer to open a gate for him. He was willing to risk my professional nursing license by putting a psychiatric police report on my record, all to save face in front of Aunt Diane and Uncle Greg. I did not raise my voice. I did not get defensive. I utilized the exact same calm, authoritative tone I used when dealing with combative patients. "Deputy Harrison, I am currently standing in the trauma ward of Chicago Memorial Hospital. I am completely lucid, entirely sober, and in the middle of my shift. My father is lying to you to cover up his own embarrassment." There was a brief pause on the line. "Go on," the deputy said, his tone shifting slightly from suspicious to attentive. "Law enforcement officers do not like being used as pawns in family disputes, and they especially despise being lied to. That lake house is not a shared family asset," I explained clearly and deliberately. "I bought that property entirely on my own 2 years ago. My father has zero financial or legal stake in it. He invited 32 extended relatives to my house without my permission, expecting to force his way in. When I refused to allow it, I leased the property to a private corporate security firm for a 7-day executive retreat. The men inside are not trapped. They are paying tenants who possess a legally binding contract. My father is currently attempting to break into a heavily secured corporate event because his ego cannot handle being told no. I heard the heavy sound of the deputy exhaling through the radio microphone. Ma'am, those are incredibly serious accusations. Your father was very adamant that his name is on the original mortgage. Are you standing near your cruiser, deputy? I asked. Yes, I am. Please give me the direct email address for your dispatch center. I am going to send you 2 documents right now. The first is the registered property deed proving I am the sole legal owner. The second is the corporate lease agreement signed by the security firm currently occupying the house. The deputy recited the email address. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, walked over to the break room computer and forwarded the PDF files directly to the police dispatcher. I knew it would only take a few seconds for the dispatch center to verify the official county records and relay the truth to the officer on the scene. While we waited, I could hear the background noise through the deputy's phone. My father was holding court. He was talking loudly to Uncle Greg and Todd, playing the part of the deeply concerned parent. I heard him say, "It is just a shame it had to come to this. She has been working too hard. Her mind is just not right. We will get this gate open, get everyone settled by the water, and then I will drive down to the city to get her some psychiatric help." The absolute sickness of his performance made my stomach turn, but the anger quickly faded into cold anticipation. I knew exactly what was about to happen. 30 seconds later, the deputy's radio chirped loudly. "Dispatch to Harrison," a crackling voice announced. "Documents received and verified. The caller, Allison, is the sole legal owner of the parcel. No other names are on the deed. The corporate lease agreement is active and valid. The male subject on scene has no legal right to access the property." The silence that fell over the background of the call was magnificent. My father stopped mid-sentence. The confident, booming voice of the family patriarch vanished into thin air. Deputy Harrison let out a low, irritated sigh. "Thank you, dispatch." He brought the phone back up to his mouth. "Allison, I apologize for bothering you at work. Your documentation is crystal clear." "Deputy, before you hang up," I said quickly, "can you please keep the phone line open? I want to hear exactly how my father explains this to you, and I want to formally request that you issue him a trespass warning." "I can absolutely do that," the deputy replied, his voice hardening with professional irritation. I heard the heavy crunch of the deputy's boots on the gravel as he walked away from his cruiser and approached my father. The background chatter of the extended family completely died down. 32 people were holding their breath, waiting to see how the police were going to handle the situation. Richard, the deputy's voice, barked out loud enough for every single person in the caravan to hear perfectly. "Step away from the gate." My father stuttered, his voice suddenly small and trembling. "Officer, did you get authorization to breach the lock? We really need to get these people out of the sun. My daughter is not well." "Do not lie to me again, Richard." The deputy snapped, the authority in his voice echoing sharply down the road. "I just received the official deed from the county records sent directly by your daughter. Your name is nowhere on this property. You have absolutely no legal right to this land, this house, or that gate. You filed a false police report claiming a medical emergency just because you were locked out of a house you do not own." The collective gasp from the relatives was audible even through the phone speaker. Aunt Diane let out a sharp cry of shock. Todd's friends started murmuring loudly to each other. The illusion was dead. The curtain had been ripped down, exposing my father as a complete fraud to the very people he had spent months trying to impress. "Officer, there must be a mistake, my mother." Susan interjected, her voice panicked and shrill as she tried to run damage control. "We are a family. We share everything." "Ma'am, the law does not care about your family dynamics," the deputy retorted firmly. "The law cares about property rights. And right now, you are a convoy of 32 people attempting to trespass on a legally leased corporate compound." My father tried one last desperate attempt to save his dignity. "Well, if she is going to be this petty about it, we will just leave. We do not need her house anyway. Come on, everyone, back in your cars." "Not so fast," the deputy interrupted. "Richard, based on your previous attempt to damage the gate with your vehicle and at the direct request of the property owner, I am officially issuing you a formal trespass warning." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the gravel road. If you, your wife, or your son ever step foot on this property again, you will not be asked to leave. You will be immediately arrested and placed in the back of my cruiser for criminal trespassing. Do you understand me?" My father did not answer right away. The humiliation of being dressed down by law enforcement like a common criminal in front of his brother, his sister, and his son's friends was paralyzing him. I said, "Do you understand me?" The deputy repeated, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "Yes," my father finally choked out. The word sounded like it had been dragged out of his throat over broken glass. "Good. Now get in your trucks and clear this road. If this caravan is not gone in 5 minutes, I will start writing citations for illegally blocking a county roadway." I heard the heavy, defeated slam of my father's truck door. Engines began turning over down the line. The family reunion had officially been evicted before it even began. The deputy lifted the phone back to his ear. "The perimeter is secure, Allison. They are turning around and leaving. We have the trespass warning logged in our system. If they come back, call 911 and we will make the arrests." "Thank you, Deputy Harrison," I said sincerely. "Stay safe out there." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline rush of pure, unadulterated victory. I had finally done it. I had stood my ground and let them crash into the concrete wall of my boundaries. But as I walked back onto the trauma floor, I knew this was not the end of the story. My parents had 32 confused, angry relatives following them down a rural highway. They had promised a luxury vacation, and my father's bruised ego would demand that he deliver one no matter the cost. They were going to try and find a way to make me pay for their public humiliation. And I was completely ready to let them try. By the time my shift ended at 7 in the evening, the adrenaline that had carried me through the morning confrontation had completely faded, replaced by the deep, familiar ache of a 14-hour workday in the emergency room. I changed out of my scrubs, walked to the employee parking garage, and climbed into the quiet sanctuary of my car. I locked the doors, leaned my head against the steering wheel, and took a long, slow breath. I had kept my parents and Todd blocked on my phone all day. I needed a clear head to treat my patients, and I knew my family would be spiraling in the aftermath of their eviction. But as I sat in the dim light of the parking garage, I realized I could not keep my head in the sand forever. I needed to know what their next move was. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened my voicemail. There were no voicemails. But when I opened my text messages, I saw a string of 14 unread messages from a number I did not have saved. I tapped the screen. The first message was a high-resolution photo of a massive, opulent hotel lobby. The floors were polished marble, massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the lake. I recognized the place instantly. It was the Azure Cove Resort and Spa, the most exclusive, astronomically expensive luxury hotel in the entire Lake of the Ozarks region. A standard room there cost over $800 a night during peak season. The next message was a wall of text. It read, "Allison, this is your mother. I am borrowing your Aunt Diane's phone because you are acting like a petulant child and blocking our numbers. You really thought you could ruin this family reunion. You thought you could embarrass your father in front of his own brother and send us packing back to Chicago. Well, you are wrong. We are not letting your selfish manic episode destroy our week." I stared at the glowing screen, a cold mix of shock and amusement washing over me. They did not go home. My father's ego was simply too massive to accept defeat. The thought of driving the caravan back to the city, admitting to 32 extended relatives that he had lied about owning the lake house and had zero backup plan, was a fate worse than death for him. He had to maintain the illusion of the wealthy, generous patriarch at all costs, even if it meant bankrupting himself in the process. I scrolled down to the next message. Susan had continued her tirade. "We have checked the entire family into Azure Cove. We booked 8 premium lakeside suites for the week. We also reserved 3 private cabanas by the infinity pool and booked a catered dinner in the grand dining room for tonight. Everyone is getting settled and having a wonderful time, no thanks to you." I did the math in my head. 8 premium suites at peak season rates for 5 nights, plus private cabanas and catered meals for 32 people. The total cost would easily shatter $25,000. My parents did not have that kind of money. I knew for a fact that my father's sales commissions had dried up 3 years ago and their primary bank account was constantly hovering near zero. The final text message from Aunt Diane's phone revealed exactly how they planned to pull off this grand illusion. Susan wrote, "The total bill is going to be around $28,000. The concierge is holding the rooms on a temporary authorization, but they need a permanent card on file by tomorrow morning. You are going to call the front desk right now and give them your credit card information. You are going to pay for this entire week to compensate for the emotional distress and public humiliation you caused this family today. Consider this a hard lesson in family hospitality and respect. If you do not call the hotel by 8 tomorrow morning, your father is going to take this out of your inheritance, and we will never speak to you again. Call me the second you read this." I read the final sentence 3 times, my jaw physically dropping. The absolute staggering delusion of their demand left me temporarily speechless. They genuinely believed that after attempting to break into my property, after lying to the police to try and force a psychiatric hold on me, and after being publicly humiliated and hit with a trespass warning, I was going to reward them by handing over nearly $30,000. They were trying to punish me for setting a boundary by dropping a financial bomb on my life. It was the exact same playbook they had used my entire childhood. If I refused to give Todd my allowance, they broke my favorite toys. If I refused to do Todd's homework, they grounded me for a month. They believed that if they made the punishment painful enough, I would eventually break and fall back in line. But I was not a child anymore, and my credit card was not a toy they could break. I did not reply to the text. I did not call Aunt Diane's phone. I simply took a screenshot of the entire conversation, saving the undeniable written proof that my mother was actively attempting to extort me for $28,000. As I sat there, another message popped up on the screen, this time from a different, unsaved number. The aggressive, entitled tone gave it away immediately. It was Todd using one of his friend's phones. "Hey, Al. It is Todd. You really messed up this time. Dad is furious. You need to pay this hotel bill tonight. I brought my friends all the way out here, and I am not looking like a loser because you decided to be a psycho. Pay the resort, and maybe Dad will forgive you. By the way, Jasmine keeps asking why we are not at the house. Do not tell her anything, just pay the bill." I stopped reading. My eyes locked onto the name, Jasmine. Jasmine was Todd's wife. She was a brilliant, highly successful corporate consultant who worked 70-hour weeks traveling across the country. She was fiercely independent, incredibly sharp, and did not tolerate nonsense from anyone. Jasmine and I had always maintained a polite, distant relationship, mostly because my parents found her intimidating and subtly excluded her from family events. But reading Todd's message, a massive, glaring puzzle piece clicked into place. Do not tell her anything. Why would Todd care what I told Jasmine, unless Jasmine did not know the truth? I leaned back against my leather seat, my mind racing through the interactions I had witnessed between Todd and his wife over the past 5 years. They drove luxury cars. They wore designer clothes. They portrayed the perfect wealthy young power couple. But I knew Todd's actual salary was barely enough to cover his own golf club memberships. I knew he was constantly asking my parents for cash handouts. And suddenly I realized exactly what Todd had been doing. He had been lying to her. He had built his entire marriage on a foundation of massive financial deception, using his wife's lucrative salary to fund his lifestyle while claiming he was a successful real estate investor. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. The exhaustion in my bones was instantly replaced by a renewed sense of absolute clarity. My parents thought they could hold a $28,000 hotel bill over my head to force my submission. They thought they were the ones in control of the narrative. They had absolutely no idea that Todd had just handed me the key to their complete destruction. I put my car in drive and pulled out of the hospital parking garage, navigating the busy night streets of Chicago. I did not feel stressed. I did not feel anxious. For the first time in 35 years, I felt like a master chess player who was exactly 3 moves ahead of her opponents. My parents had built a towering house of cards based entirely on lies, manipulation, and stolen money. And tomorrow morning I was going to invite Jasmine to help me burn it all to the ground. I parked my car in the quiet, secure garage of my apartment complex, turned off the ignition, and just sat in the heavy silence for a moment. The drive back from the hospital had been a blur of strategic calculations. My parents and my brother had checked 32 people into the most expensive luxury resort on the lake. They were trying to force me to pay a $28,000 bill to compensate for their public humiliation, and Todd had explicitly warned me not to tell his wife anything. I knew I had a massive advantage, but before I could even begin to draft my next move, the phone in my hand vibrated. I looked down at the bright screen. It was Jasmine. Perfect timing. I took a deep, steadying breath, stepped out of my car, and swiped the green accept button. Before I could even say hello, Jasmine launched into her attack. "Allison, I need you to explain exactly what kind of psychotic, unhinged stunt you pulled this morning," she demanded. Her voice was not shrill or hysterical like my mother's. It was cold, sharp, and highly articulate. Jasmine was a fiercely intelligent, incredibly successful corporate consultant. She spent her entire professional life dissecting failing companies, firing incompetent executives, and managing multi-million-dollar budgets. She commanded respect in every room she walked into. And right now, she was speaking to me with the exact same tone she would use on an employee who had just committed massive corporate fraud. I closed my car door and started walking toward the elevator. "Hello, Jasmine. It is nice to hear from you, too." "Do not patronize me, Allison," she snapped back immediately. "I am sitting in a cabana at the Azure Cove Resort instead of enjoying the peaceful weekend by the water that my husband promised me. Todd is currently at the hotel bar with your father hyperventilating because he is trying to figure out how to mitigate the legal disaster you just caused. So you are going to tell me right now why you changed the smart locks on his house and illegally leased his property to a private security firm." I stopped walking. The concrete floor of the parking garage felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. I knew Todd had been lying to her, but hearing the absolute conviction in Jasmine's voice made the sheer scale of his deception terrifyingly clear. "His house," I repeated, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Todd told you that he owns the lake house." Jasmine let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Oh, please. Stop playing this pathetic game. I know you have always been jealous of your brother Allison. I know you feel like your parents favor him, but attempting to squat on our property and lease it out from under us is a new low even for you. Do you have any idea how much money we have poured into that place?" I leaned against the concrete wall near the elevator, completely abandoning my plan to go upstairs. I needed to hear every single word of this. "Tell me, Jasmine, how much money have you poured into it? Do not act like you do not know." She fired back, her anger masking the slight hesitation in her voice. "I look at our joint bank statements every single month. Last year, Todd withdrew $30,000 for the initial down payment. 3 months ago, he pulled out $12,000 for a brand new HVAC system because you claimed the old one was failing. He pays the property taxes every quarter. He let you manage the rental listings and stay there on weekends because he knew you needed a quiet place to recover from your hospital shifts. We were doing you a favor, Allison, and this is how you repay us." The pieces fell into place with a sickening heavy thud. Todd was not just a liar. He was a financial parasite. He was laundering his wife's hard-earned money. Jasmine worked 70-hour weeks flying across the country to consult for major tech firms, bringing in a massive salary. Todd had taken her money, claiming he was investing it in real estate, when in reality he was either funneling it directly to our broke parents to keep up their wealthy facade, or he was blowing it on his own luxury car leases and expensive golf memberships. He had used my house, the sanctuary I had worked double shifts to buy, as his ultimate alibi. "Jasmine," I said quietly, the clinical detachment leaving my voice. "Where did Todd say the rental income was going?" "He told me he was letting you keep 60% of it as a property management fee, and the rest was going into an emergency repair fund," she answered, though her sharp corporate confidence was beginning to waver just a fraction. "Which is why he is panicking right now. He said your little illegal lease stunt with the security company completely froze his access to the property's emergency fund. And now he has to figure out how to pay this $28,000 hotel bill out of pocket. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow exhale. It was a two-pronged scam. My parents were trying to extort me into paying the resort bill by holding my inheritance hostage. But Todd was simultaneously setting his wife up to pay the exact same bill. He was laying the groundwork to ask Jasmine to drain their joint savings to cover the resort using me as the convenient villain who had supposedly frozen his assets. They were trying to fleece both of us at the exact same time. Jasmine, listen to me very carefully, I said, my tone shifting into the calm, authoritative register I used when delivering critical news to a patient's family. I am not angry with you. I am not going to yell at you, but you are a data-driven woman. You are a consultant. You do not make decisions based on hearsay. You make them based on hard evidence. I do not have time for your riddles, Allison. Are you sitting in front of your laptop right now? I asked, ignoring her frustration. There was a pause. Yes, I am trying to work while your family gets drunk at the pool. Good. Do not log off. I realized in that exact moment that trying to explain the truth over the phone would be useless. Todd had spent 5 years brainwashing her, painting me as the bitter, jealous sister and himself as the generous, successful brother. If I just told her he was lying, she would think I was continuing my supposed manic episode. She needed to see the raw data. She needed to see the contracts. Todd did not buy that house, Jasmine. I stated clearly, my words echoing slightly in the empty parking garage. Todd has never paid a single property tax bill. Todd did not buy a $12,000 HVAC system. I bought that house 2 years ago entirely on my own. My name is the only name on the deed. I paid the down payment from my own nursing salary. That is a lie. Jasmine interrupted, her voice rising in defense of her husband. I saw the bank withdrawals. I saw the $30,000 leave our account. I am sure you did, I replied softly, feeling a genuine wave of sympathy for the brilliant woman on the other end of the line. But that money did not go toward my house. I do not know where your husband put your money, Jasmine, but I can promise you it did not go into real estate. Allison, if you are lying to me to get back at your brother, I swear to God I will ruin you, she threatened. But the absolute certainty in her voice was cracking. The analytical part of her brain, the part that made her a ruthless corporate consultant, was starting to run the variables. She was starting to realize that Todd's story had holes in it. I am going to hang up this phone, I told her calmly. I am going to walk up to my apartment, and I am going to open my secure filing cabinet. In exactly 5 minutes, I am going to send an email to your professional work address. It will contain the official county deed to the lake house. It will contain the property tax records for the last 2 years, proving that every single payment came directly from my personal checking account. And it will contain the receipt for the HVAC system I had installed last year, which cost $4,000, not $12,000. Jasmine did not say a word. The silence on the line was heavy and thick with impending devastation. When you look at those documents, Jasmine, you are going to realize that your husband has been stealing from you for years. I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. And then you are going to realize that he brought you to that resort today, not for a family vacation, but to trap you into paying a $28,000 bill for his parents. Check your inbox in 5 minutes. I did not wait for her to respond. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I stood in the quiet parking garage for a few seconds, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. I was about to detonate a bomb that would completely obliterate Todd's marriage. I was about to hand a brilliant, ruthless woman the exact evidence she needed to destroy my brother's life. I smiled, slipped my phone into my bag, and walked toward the elevator. It was time to send the email. I unlocked the front door of my apartment and stepped into the quiet, dark entryway. I did not bother turning on the main living room lights. I walked straight down the hallway to my small home office, flicked on the desk lamp, and knelt in front of the heavy, fireproof filing cabinet tucked in the corner. The entire drive up the elevator, my heart had been beating with a steady, rhythmic intensity. This was not the chaotic, panicked heart rate of my 20s when I constantly worried about how my family was going to punish me for stepping out of line. This was the calm, calculated adrenaline of a surgeon about to make the first crucial incision. I spun the combination dial on the cabinet, pulled the heavy drawer open, and retrieved a thick manila folder labeled Lake Property. I sat down at my desk, booted up my laptop, and opened the folder. The documents inside were pristine, organized, and absolutely damning. I pulled out the original property deed, complete with the raised official seal of the county clerk. I grabbed the closing documents from the title company, which clearly listed my name and my name alone as the sole purchaser. I found the receipt from the local HVAC company for the new heating and cooling system I had installed last year, showing the total cost was exactly $4,000 paid in full from my checking account. Finally, I logged into my online banking portal and downloaded the last 2 years of property tax wire transfers. I opened a new email draft and typed in Jasmine's corporate email address. I did not write a long emotional paragraph. I did not include any defensive explanations or snarky comments about my brother. Jasmine was a woman who respected raw data. She spent her life dealing with corporate executives who tried to hide their failures behind flowery language. I knew the most effective way to communicate with her was to simply hand her the weapon and step back. In the subject line, I typed Lake House ownership documents and financial records. In the body of the email, I wrote exactly 2 sentences. Jasmine attached is the official county deed, the closing paperwork, my property tax wire transfers, and the actual receipt for the HVAC system. I highly suggest you run a full audit on your joint checking accounts. I attached the 4 PDF files. I moved my cursor over the send button, took a deep breath, and clicked it. The email swooshed into the digital ether. The truth was officially out of my hands. I closed the laptop, walked into my kitchen, and poured myself a tall glass of ice water. I leaned against the marble counter, staring at the digital clock on the microwave. I knew exactly what was happening at the Azure Cove Resort right now. Jasmine was sitting in a luxury cabana, opening that email on her laptop. She was clicking on the attachments. Her highly trained analytical brain was scanning the county seals, checking the dates, and verifying the routing numbers. Todd had spent 5 years weaving a massive, complex web of lies to stroke his own fragile ego. He could not handle the fact that his wife was a massive financial success while he was essentially treading water in a mediocre sales job. He needed to feel like the powerful provider. He needed my parents to see him as the wealthy, successful golden child. So he fabricated an entire secret life as a savvy real estate investor, using my hard work as his prop and using Jasmine's hard-earned money as his personal slush fund. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I was just starting to wonder if Todd had managed to intercept her when my phone suddenly lit up on the kitchen counter. It was Jasmine. I picked it up and answered. "Hello?" There was no immediate response. The line was completely silent except for the faint, steady sound of Jasmine breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was entirely stripped of the aggressive corporate anger she had directed at me earlier. It was hollow, quiet, and terrifyingly cold. "The county seal is real," she said slowly. "I just ran the parcel identification number through the public county tax database online. The system lists Allison as the sole legal owner. The purchase date matches your closing documents. The tax payments match your bank routing numbers." "Yes," I replied simply. I heard the rapid, sharp clicking of a laptop trackpad through the speaker. Jasmine was still working, still pulling up data. $4,000 for the HVAC system, she muttered, her voice trembling just a fraction as the sheer scale of the betrayal fully registered in her mind. Todd pulled $12,000 out of our joint savings account for that system. He showed me a printed invoice. "He forged it, Jasmine," I told her gently. "He used my house as an alibi to drain your accounts." $52,000, she whispered. The number hit the air like a physical weight. I went through the last 3 years of our joint savings. She continued, her breathing growing slightly heavier. $30,000 for the down payment, $12,000 for the HVAC, $10,000 in various emergency repairs and property taxes. $52,000 is gone. Jasmine, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Does Todd have a gambling problem? Does he have bad investments? Where did that money go? There was a long pause. I heard a sharp, bitter laugh escape her throat, a laugh that sounded exactly like a woman who had just realized she was married to a complete stranger. He did not gamble it, Allison, she said, her voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. He gave it to your parents. I closed my eyes, the final piece of the puzzle sliding into place. It all makes sense now, Jasmine continued, her analytical brain dissecting the past 5 years with brutal efficiency. Your father lost his primary commission contracts 3 years ago. They should be broke. But they still have their country club memberships. Your mother still drives a brand new luxury SUV. They constantly host lavish dinners. Todd has been funding their lifestyle with my money. He has been playing the wealthy, generous son by stealing my salary, all while telling me he was building a real estate portfolio for our future. The sickness of it all was overwhelming. My parents were perfectly fine watching Todd steal from his own wife as long as it kept them living in luxury and allowed them to maintain their status among their wealthy friends. They were all complicit in a massive financial illusion. Where is Todd right now? I asked. He is down at the resort bar with your father, Jasmine replied, her voice growing harder, sharper, solidifying into absolute steel. They are drinking expensive scotch and trying to figure out how to handle the fact that you locked them out. Jasmine, I need you to understand what their next move is, I warned her. I received a text message from my mother an hour ago. They checked 32 relatives into Azure Cove without a permanent credit card on file. The bill is going to be nearly $30,000. My mother tried to extort me, claiming I have to pay it by tomorrow morning or they will cut me out of the will. I am not paying a single cent. I heard Jasmine take a sharp intake of breath as she realized the immediate danger she was in. If I do not pay it, I continued, Todd is going to come to you. He is going to invent a massive lie. He is going to say that I froze his assets or that the security firm locked up his emergency funds. He is going to beg you to put your corporate card on file with the hotel to save his parents from being arrested for defrauding the resort. He is planning to steal another $30,000 from you by tomorrow morning. The silence on the line stretched for several long seconds. I could practically hear the brilliant, ruthless corporate consultant taking full control of the betrayed wife. Jasmine, I said quietly, what are you going to do? I am going to destroy him, she said. The absolute conviction in those 5 words sent a chill down my spine. She did not sound hysterical. She sounded like an executioner reading a sentence. I am going to let him dig his own grave tonight, Jasmine continued, her tone entirely devoid of emotion. I am going to let him come back to this cabana, and I am going to let him lie to my face about the money. I am going to pack all of my belongings into my car tonight while he is sleeping. And tomorrow morning, I asked. Tomorrow morning, the entire extended family is scheduled to have a massive catered breakfast buffet in the grand lobby at 9 o'clock, she stated. I want you to be there, Allison. I want you to walk into that lobby and watch what happens when they realize nobody is paying their bill. I will be there, I promised. Thank you for the documents, Allison, Jasmine said quietly. Have a good night. She hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen staring at the dark screen. The alliance was formed. Todd and my parents had spent years assuming they were the smartest people in the room. They thought they could manipulate me, steal from Jasmine, and force the world to cater to their massive egos. They had no idea that they had just pushed 2 incredibly capable, highly motivated women into a corner and handed us the matches to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. I walked into my bedroom feeling a deep, restful exhaustion finally washing over me. I set my alarm for 7 in the morning. I needed to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be the most important, satisfying day of my entire life, and I wanted to be fully awake to witness every single second of the fallout. But as I pulled the covers over my shoulders, my phone buzzed one last time with an email notification from my credit monitoring service. My parents, desperate and cornered, were about to make their fatal mistake. Thursday morning began with the blinding fluorescent lights and the familiar chaotic rhythm of the Chicago Memorial Hospital emergency room. The brief, restful sleep I managed to catch the night before was already a distant memory. I was back in my dark blue scrubs, a stethoscope draped heavily around my neck, fully immersed in a grueling day shift. For the first 3 hours of the morning, I did not have a single second to think about my family, the lake house, or the impending explosion I had orchestrated between my brother and his wife. I was too busy stabilizing a victim from a severe car collision and coordinating blood transfusions. The emergency room has always been my true sanctuary. It is a place of absolute logic and immediate consequences. If a patient is bleeding, you apply pressure. If a patient cannot breathe, you intubate. There is no room for emotional manipulation, no space for gaslighting, and absolutely zero tolerance for lies. The monitor either shows a heartbeat or it does not. It is the exact opposite of the toxic smoke and mirrors environment I was forced to navigate during my childhood. By 10 in the morning, the initial rush of critical trauma patients had finally stabilized. I handed my charts over to the attending physician and stepped into the staff break room to grab a quick bottle of water. The room was quiet, smelling faintly of clinical sanitizer and burnt coffee. I leaned against the laminate counter, closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, and allowed myself to breathe. Then the heavy silence was shattered by a sharp, aggressive vibration against my hip. It was not the standard, gentle buzz of a text message or a social security reminder. It was a rapid, continuous, pulsing sequence. I pulled my phone from my scrub pocket and looked at the screen. The entire display was illuminated in bright, alarming red. It was a high-priority push notification from the premium credit monitoring application I had installed on my phone 5 years ago, right after Todd had ruined my credit score with his fraudulent student loan. I tapped the notification, my thumb hovering over the screen as the biometric scanner unlocked the application. The dashboard loaded instantly, displaying a massive red warning banner across the top of the interface. Hard inquiry detected. Immediate action required. Potential fraudulent activity on your account. My heart did not pound with panic. It slowed down, beating with a cold, calculated precision. I clicked on the detailed report to see exactly who was trying to access my financial profile. The data populated on the screen in stark, undeniable black and white. Merchant requesting inquiry. Azure Cove Resort and Spa Hospitality Financing Division. Application type, unsecured personal line of credit. Amount requested, $25,000. Applicant name, Allison. I stared at the glowing numbers, a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washing over my tired body. My parents had actually done it. The extortion text message from my mother the previous night was not just an empty threat. When I completely ignored her demand to willingly hand over my credit card to pay for their massive luxury family reunion, they decided to take matters into their own hands. They were actively attempting to open a massive line of credit in my name without my consent to cover the cost of the 8 premium suites, the private cabanas, and the catered meals they had booked for 32 relatives. I leaned closer to the screen, reviewing the specific details of the rejected application. In order to apply for a $25,000 line of credit, the merchant required more than just a name and a birth date. They required a current address, a current employer, and a full verified social security number. How did they get my social security number? The question echoed in my mind for exactly 3 seconds before the sickening memory surfaced, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. 7 years ago, before I bought the lake house, and before I was financially stable, I had to move out of an apartment with a terrible roommate. I had a 2-month gap between leases, and in a moment of desperation, I moved back into my parents' house. During that time, tax season arrived. My mother, playing the role of the caring, helpful parent, insisted on organizing my financial paperwork. She told me I was working too many nursing shifts to handle it myself. She demanded I hand over my official W-2 forms from the hospital so she could drop them off at her personal accountant. I gave them to her. I trusted her. She must have made a photocopy. Susan had meticulously filed away a copy of my most sensitive federal tax documents, complete with my full Social Security number, my gross income, and my employment details. She did not keep it because she was sentimental. She kept it as an insurance policy. My parents had held onto my financial identity like a loaded gun in a lockbox, just waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. I could picture the scene unfolding at the Azure Cove Resort with absolute clarity. My father, Richard, was likely standing at the polished marble concierge desk in his expensive golf clothes, trying to look like a wealthy VIP. Susan was standing right next to him, holding her phone, or a piece of paper with my stolen information written on it. They were telling the hotel manager a magnificent lie. They were probably claiming that their successful daughter, the trauma nurse, had insisted on paying for the entire family reunion as a surprise gift, but she was stuck at the hospital and could not provide her physical card. So they just needed to run a quick credit application using her information to secure the rooms. They assumed it would be easy. They knew I had a flawless credit score of over 800. They assumed the third-party financing company would instantly approve the $25,000 the resort would get their money, and my parents would get to play the generous hosts for the rest of the week while dumping a massive mountain of high-interest debt onto my shoulders. They thought I was still the terrified compliant girl who would just cry and pay the bill to avoid a family screaming match. But there was one massive fatal flaw in their brilliant criminal plan. After Todd had forged my signature on that student loan 5 years ago, I did not just install a credit monitoring app. I placed a permanent impenetrable security freeze on my social security number across all 3 major credit bureaus. Nobody, not even myself, could open a new line of credit without bypassing a rigorous multi-step identity verification process that required a direct phone call and a unique PIN number. The application my parents just submitted at the resort lobby was instantly flagged, blocked, and categorized as a high-risk fraudulent event. I locked my phone screen and slid it back into my scrub pocket. The heavy, suffocating weight of family obligation that had haunted my entire life was instantly vaporized, replaced by a searing, undeniable clarity. This was no longer a toxic family dynamic. This was no longer a dispute over boundaries or an argument about who owned a lake house. This was identity theft. This was a direct, calculated attempt to commit massive financial fraud. My parents had crossed the absolute final line. They had transitioned from being emotionally abusive parents to being literal documented felons. I walked out of the break room and headed straight toward the emergency department charge nurse station. I needed someone to cover my patients for the next 30 minutes. I was not going to call my mother and scream at her. I was not going to send an angry text message demanding an explanation. Explanations were useless. I was going to use the exact weapon they had tried to use against me, the law. I walked briskly out of the break room and headed straight toward the main charge desk of the emergency department. Brenda, our veteran charge nurse, was reviewing patient charts on her monitor. I leaned over the tall counter, keeping my voice low and professional. Brenda, I need you to cover my patients for exactly 30 minutes. I have a critical personal emergency that I have to handle right now. Brenda looked up, her experienced eyes scanning my face. In my 10 years at the hospital, I had never once asked to step off the floor during a trauma shift. I was the nurse who worked through lunch breaks and picked up overtime. She did not ask any questions. She simply nodded, grabbed my tablet, and told me to take as much time as I needed. I thanked her and walked down the quiet, sterile hallway toward the private family consultation room. It was a small, soundproof room designed for doctors to deliver tragic news to grieving families. It had thick walls, a heavy solid oak door, and absolute privacy. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and sat down at the small circular table in the center of the room. I placed my phone on the table. The screen was still displaying the bright red fraud alert from my credit monitoring application. 10 years ago, my reaction to this exact situation would have been entirely different. If the old Allison had seen an alert that her parents were trying to steal $25,000 using her identity, she would have dissolved into a puddle of panic and guilt. I would have called my mother immediately, crying, begging her to withdraw the application. I would have listened to her gaslight me, telling me that family helps family, and that I was being dramatic. And in the end, I probably would have handed over my credit card just to keep the peace and protect my parents from the legal consequences of their own actions. But as I sat in that quiet room staring at the screen, my heart rate was perfectly steady. My hands were not shaking. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I only felt a cold surgical resolve. My parents had made a calculated decision to destroy my financial future to protect their fragile social status. They had crossed the line from toxic relatives to active criminals, and I was going to treat them exactly like criminals. I did not call my mother. I picked up the phone and dialed the toll-free number for the Federal Identity Theft and Fraud Division of my credit bureau. The automated system routed me quickly to a live representative. A woman with a polite professional voice answered the line, asking how she could assist me. "My name is Allison," I stated clearly. "5 minutes ago, I received an alert that a $25,000 unsecured line of credit was aggressively applied for under my Social Security number. The merchant was the Azure Cove Resort and Spa. I did not authorize this inquiry. I need to formally report it as fraudulent and secure my file." The representative asked me to verify my identity. I calmly provided my security PIN, my previous addresses, and my secure passcode. I could hear the rapid clicking of her keyboard through the receiver as she accessed my file. "Thank you, Allison," she said. "I see the inquiry here. Fortunately, because you have a permanent security freeze on your account, the financing company's automated system immediately rejected the application and flagged it. No funds were dispersed and no line of credit was opened." I felt a brief wave of satisfaction knowing my parents were currently standing at a luxury hotel concierge desk looking like absolute fools as their application was brutally declined. "I need this documented as an active identity theft attempt," I told the representative. "I know exactly who submitted the application, and I am preparing to contact law enforcement. I need the official fraud case number from your bureau to provide to the police." The representative's tone shifted, becoming much more serious. She generated the official fraud report, provided me with a 12-digit reference number, and assured me that the blocked inquiry would be entirely scrubbed from my credit history. I wrote the number down on a piece of hospital stationery, thanked her, and ended the call. Step 1 was complete. The financial firewall was reinforced. Now it was time for Step 2, the consequences. I opened the web browser on my phone and searched for the local police department that held jurisdiction over the Azure Cove Resort. It was the same county sheriff's department that had responded to my father's trespassing attempt at the lake house yesterday, but I did not want to speak to a patrol deputy this time. I needed the Financial Crimes Division. I dialed the non-emergency dispatch number. When the operator answered, I did not hesitate. "I need to report an attempted felony identity theft that just occurred at the Azure Cove Resort," I said. The operator transferred me. After a brief hold, a deep, gruff voice came on the line. "Financial Crimes Detective Lawson speaking." "Detective Lawson, I am calling to report a fraudulent credit application submitted using my stolen Social Security number. The attempt occurred less than 20 minutes ago at the Azure Cove Resort. The perpetrators attempted to secure a $25,000 line of credit to pay for a block of luxury hotel rooms." The detective's tone immediately sharpened. "That is a substantial amount. Were you a guest at the resort?" "No, I am currently at work in Chicago," I replied, "but the suspects are physically at the resort right now." Lawson asked for the suspects' names. I gave them without a single flinch: Richard and Susan. I spelled out their last name. I provided their home address in the Chicago suburbs. I described my father's silver pickup truck and my mother's luxury SUV, including the license plate numbers from memory. The detective paused. The tapping of his keyboard stopped. "Ma'am, you share the same last name. Are these individuals related to you?" "They are my parents," I said flatly. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. Law enforcement officers deal with a lot of messy family disputes, and they are trained to weed out petty arguments from actual crimes. Detective Lawson took a slow breath before speaking again. "Allison, I need to be completely transparent with you. A $25,000 fraudulent application constitutes a severe felony in this state. If I dispatch officers to the Azure Cove Resort and we retrieve the physical application or the digital logs showing your parents provided your Social Security number without your consent, this becomes a criminal matter. The state will pick up the charges. You cannot just use the police to scare them and then drop the case tomorrow when they apologize. Are you absolutely certain you want to press full criminal charges against your own parents?" The question hung in the air of the quiet consultation room. The ghosts of my childhood tried to whisper in my ear. They told me that family was everything. They told me that if I did this, there was no going back. My parents would be arrested. They would face prison time. The extended family would completely excommunicate me. But then I thought about the text message my mother had sent me the night before. Consider this a hard lesson in family hospitality. They felt entirely entitled to destroy my life. They felt completely untouchable. Detective Lawson. I said, my voice as hard and cold as polished steel. I am an emergency room trauma nurse. When a patient comes in with a limb that is severely infected and necrotic, we do not put a bandage on it and hope it gets better. We amputate it to save the rest of the body. My parents stole my federal tax documents. They attempted to defraud a hospitality vendor. They tried to saddle me with massive debt to fund their luxury vacation. I do not want an apology. I want an indictment. I am pressing full criminal charges. The detective exhaled sharply, clearly, respecting the absolute certainty in my voice. Understood. If you are willing to testify and provide the evidence, I will open the case right now. But I need a formal sworn statement from you before I can send my officers to the resort to demand their financial logs and security footage. What do you need me to do? I asked. I am sending a link to your email address right now, Lawson explained. It is our department's secure portal for official police reports. You need to log in, fill out the digital affidavit, and sign it under penalty of perjury. Describe exactly how you believe they obtained your social security number, the details of the alert you received, and the fact that you wish to pursue charges. As soon as that affidavit hits my system, I have the legal leverage to move on the resort. I will have it completed in 10 minutes, I promised. I ended the call, placed the phone flat on the table, and opened my email inbox. The link from the sheriff's department was already there waiting for me. I clicked on it, watching the official county seal load on my screen. This was the point of no return. I was about to permanently sever the toxic cord that had bound me for 35 years. And as I began typing my sworn statement recounting exactly how my mother had stolen my W-2 forms years ago, under the guise of helping me, the memories of their past financial abuse flooded back with crystal clarity, fueling every single keystroke. The digital affidavit from the county sheriff loaded on my screen. It was a sterile, straightforward government form, but to me, it looked like a declaration of independence. I began filling in the mandatory fields, my full legal name, my current address, my contact information. I typed with a steady rhythmic cadence, completely detached from the emotional weight of what I was doing. Then I reached the section labeled Statement of Probable Cause. The prompt asked me to describe the nature of the fraudulent activity and any historical context regarding the suspect's access to my identifying information. I stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. The clinical detachment I had been maintaining suddenly fractured, just for a moment, as a tidal wave of suppressed memory crashed over me. To explain how my mother had my social security number, I had to explain the first time she used it. I had to type out the darkest, most humiliating period of my entire adult life. It was 7 years ago. I was 28 years old, a young nurse just starting to find my footing in the emergency department. I was driving a beat-up, unreliable sedan that frequently overheated on my way to the hospital. After a terrifying incident where the car completely died in the middle of a busy Chicago intersection at midnight, I decided it was time to buy something safe. I had been living frugally, paying my rent on time, and saving a modest down payment. I walked into a reputable used car dealership, picked out a reliable compact car, and sat down in the finance manager's office with a proud smile on my face. I will never forget the look of uncomfortable pity on that manager's face when he returned with my credit report. He slid the piece of paper across the desk and quietly informed me that my application was denied. He told me my credit score was a 520. He said I had multiple accounts in severe delinquency and a massive personal loan that had recently gone into default. I told him he was making a mistake. I told him I only had one credit card, and I paid it off every month. He turned his computer monitor around and showed me the raw data. There was a $15,000 personal loan along with two high-limit retail credit cards all opened in my name exactly 8 months prior. The addresses associated with the fraudulent accounts were not my apartment. They were my parents' home address in the suburbs. The air had been sucked completely out of the tiny dealership office. I drove my broken car back to my apartment, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. I logged into a credit monitoring website and looked at the dates the accounts were opened. They perfectly aligned with Todd's first wedding. Todd had decided he wanted a massive, lavish destination wedding at an all-inclusive resort in Cancun. The bride's family was incredibly wealthy, and my father Richard was absolutely terrified of looking inferior. But my father did not have the cash to pay for the extravagant rehearsal dinners, the premium open bars, and the upgraded oceanfront suites he had promised to cover. Instead of admitting he could not afford it, my parents used the tax documents my mother had supposedly organized for me. They used my clean financial record to take out a high-interest personal loan and open credit cards to fund my brother's luxury wedding. A wedding to a woman Todd ended up divorcing just 8 months later. I remembered driving to their house the next morning to confront them. I walked into their pristine, beautifully decorated suburban kitchen holding a printed stack of my ruined credit reports. I was crying uncontrollably. I asked them how they could possibly do this to me. The memory of their reactions still made my blood run cold. They did not apologize. They did not show a single ounce of remorse. My mother Susan immediately put her face in her hands and started forcing fake tears, playing the ultimate victim. She wailed that I was being cruel to her, that she was just trying to give her son a beautiful wedding, and that the financial pressure was too much for her to bear. My father stepped in front of her, pointing a furious finger at my face. He yelled at me for making my mother cry over something as trivial as money. He gaslit me with breathtaking precision. He told me it was an absolute emergency, that family always helps family, and that they fully intended to pay it back. He looked me in the eye and said, "You have a great job at the hospital, Allison. Do not be so dramatic. We will figure it out. Stop trying to ruin your brother's happiness." They never figured it out. They never paid back a single cent. Because the accounts were linked to their home address, and because I was too terrified of destroying the family to file a police report at 28 years old, the debt collectors came after me. I absorbed the entire $15,000. For the next 4 years, my life was a living nightmare. While Todd was posting photos of his weekend golf trips and his leased sports cars, I was living on cheap ramen noodles and working mandatory double shifts. I picked up every single holiday shift, every overnight rotation, and every undesirable weekend schedule just to make the minimum payments on the debt they stole from me. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I even missed Todd's college graduation because I was locked in the trauma ward working overtime to pay off the very fraud he benefited from. I spent 4 years meticulously repairing my credit score point by point, dollar by agonizing dollar. I built an iron fortress around my finances. I froze my credit. I swore to myself that I would never ever let them use me as their personal bank account again. I blinked the bright light of the hospital consultation room, bringing me back to the present. I looked down at the digital affidavit on my screen. The anger from that memory did not paralyze me like it used to. It fueled me. The 28-year-old girl who cried in her parents' kitchen was dead. The 35-year-old trauma nurse sitting in this chair knew exactly how to stop the bleeding. I placed my hands back on the keyboard. I did not write an emotional essay. I kept it strictly factual. I typed out exactly how Susan had acquired my W-2 forms under false pretenses 7 years ago. I documented the previous $15,000 fraud, explaining that I had not pressed charges at the time due to familial coercion, but that this established a clear, undeniable pattern of criminal financial behavior. Then I reached the bottom of the form. The portal requested any supporting digital evidence I could provide. I opened the photo gallery on my phone and selected the screenshot of the text message my mother had sent me the night before. The message where she explicitly demanded I pay the $28,000 bill at Azure Cove. The message where she threatened to cut me out of the family and strip my inheritance if I did not hand over my credit card to cover their luxury vacation. I uploaded the image to the police portal. It was the final devastating nail in their coffin. The text message completely destroyed any potential defense they might try to use. They could never claim the credit application at the hotel was a simple misunderstanding or a clerical error. The text message proved active malicious intent. It proved extortion. I scrolled to the final page of the affidavit. A large digital box awaited my signature, accompanied by a stark legal warning that submitting false information was a federal offense. I read through my statement one last time. Every word was true. Every detail was accurate. My parents had finally pushed me completely out of their reach, straight into the arms of the justice system. I used my index finger to trace my signature across the screen. I checked the box confirming I was submitting this statement under penalty of perjury. Without a single second of hesitation, I hit the submit button. The screen loaded for a moment before displaying a bright green checkmark. Affidavit successfully transmitted to the County Financial Crimes Division. I left my phone on the table and walked over to the small sink in the corner of the consultation room. I turned on the cold water, splashed it over my face, and dried my skin with a rough paper towel. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, but I also looked completely at peace. The trap was fully set. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated on the table. It was an email notification from Detective Lawson. The message was incredibly brief. It read, "Affidavit and supporting evidence received." The text message establishes clear intent. I am dispatching 2 units to the Azure Cove Resort immediately to secure the financial logs from the concierge and pull the lobby security footage. We will have the arrest warrants drafted by tomorrow morning. I locked my phone, slipped it into my scrub pocket, and unlocked the heavy oak door of the consultation room. I walked back out onto the chaotic floor of the emergency department. Brenda, the charge nurse, looked over at me from her station. "Is everything okay, Allison?" she asked. I gave her a genuine, relaxed smile. "Everything is perfectly fine, Brenda. I'm ready to take my patients back." I spent the rest of my shift saving lives, completely unbothered by the fact that my parents' fake empire was currently in its final hours. They were sleeping in luxury suites they could not afford, completely unaware that the Financial Crimes Division was already building their case. Tomorrow morning, Jasmine was going to expose Todd's massive financial theft in front of the entire family, and right after that, law enforcement was going to arrive to escort my parents out of the lobby in handcuffs. The collision course was locked in, and I was going to be standing right in the front row to watch the impact. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky and a profound sense of absolute finality. I did not wake up feeling anxious. I did not have the familiar heavy knot of dread in my stomach that usually accompanied any family gathering. Instead, I felt entirely weightless. I walked into my closet and deliberately bypassed the comfortable sweaters and casual jeans I usually wore on my days off. Today was not a day for comfort. Today was a day for absolute authority. I selected a tailored black blazer, a crisp white silk blouse, and fitted black trousers. I pulled my hair back into a sleek professional knot at the nape of my neck. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the terrified, compliant daughter my parents had spent 35 years conditioning. I saw a highly competent trauma nurse who was about to permanently sever a necrotic limb. The drive to the Lake of the Ozarks took exactly 2 hours. The morning sun reflected off the pristine water, creating a blinding, beautiful glare. As I navigated the winding luxury roads leading to the Azure Cove Resort, I thought about the phone call I had received from Detective Lawson late last night. He confirmed that the Financial Crimes Unit had successfully secured the digital logs from the resort concierge, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that my father had provided my stolen Social Security number. The arrest warrants were signed by a judge at 8 o'clock this morning. The police were already on their way. All I had to do was walk in and ensure I had a front row seat. I pulled my car into the massive circular driveway of the resort. A valet in a crisp uniform immediately opened my door. I handed him my keys, straightened my blazer, and walked up the wide stone steps toward the grand entrance. The moment I stepped through the heavy glass doors, the sheer staggering scale of the luxury hit me. The lobby was a massive expanse of polished white marble vaulted ceilings lined with imported crystal chandeliers and towering floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the lake. The air smelled of fresh lilies, expensive espresso, and wealth. It was the exact type of environment my father was obsessed with, a place designed to make people feel important. And it was exactly the type of place he could never actually afford. I walked past the front desk, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and headed toward the grand dining wing just off the main lobby. It did not take long to find them. 32 extended relatives were occupying an entire section of premium tables near the massive windows. It was a scene of absolute ridiculous excess. The resort offered a lavish breakfast buffet, and my family was taking full advantage of it. I saw younger cousins walking back to the tables with plates piled impossibly high with thick-cut bacon, customized omelets, and Belgian waffles. Waiters in white aprons were walking between the tables, pouring fresh mimosas and premium coffee. At the center of it all, sitting at the head of the largest table, was my father. Richard was holding court. He was wearing an expensive pressed golf polo, leaning back in his chair, and laughing loudly at a joke Uncle Greg had just made. He looked completely relaxed, playing the role of the benevolent billionaire patriarch flawlessly. My mother, Susan, was sitting right next to him, sipping a mimosa and dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. She did not look like a woman who had committed a federal felony 24 hours ago. She looked entirely unbothered, utterly convinced of her own untouchability. A few seats down, Todd was staring at his phone, his face looking slightly pale and drawn. But sitting directly across from Todd was Jasmine. She was dressed in a sharp, immaculate designer suit, looking like she was preparing to walk into a corporate boardroom and fire an entire executive team. She was slowly stirring a cup of black coffee, completely silent. As I approached the dining area, Jasmine looked up. Her eyes locked onto mine. She did not smile, but she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The stage was set. I stepped off the lobby runner and onto the tile of the dining room. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels drew the attention of Aunt Diane first. She was mid-sentence, holding a silver fork, when she looked up and saw me walking toward the tables. Her mouth fell slightly open and she elbowed Uncle Greg. A ripple effect washed over the 32 relatives. Conversations abruptly stopped. Laughter died in the air. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring at the woman who had locked them out of a lake house the day before. The heavy, awkward silence spread like a physical wave across the dining area. My father noticed the sudden quiet. He turned his head, following Aunt Diane's gaze, and spotted me standing at the edge of the dining area. I fully expected him to look angry. I expected him to jump out of his chair and start yelling about the embarrassment I had caused him at the gate. But he did not. Instead, a massive, incredibly smug smile spread across his face. Susan turned around, saw me, and mirrored his expression perfectly. Her eyes lit up with a toxic, triumphant glee. They did not know about the police. They did not know the credit application had triggered a federal fraud alert. In their massive, delusional minds, they thought my appearance meant only one thing. They thought their extortion text had worked. They genuinely believed that I had driven 2 hours this morning because the threat of being cut out of the family and losing my inheritance had finally broken me. They assumed I had arrived to apologize, beg for their forgiveness in front of the entire family, and hand my physical credit card to the concierge to pay the $28,000 bill they could not secure credit for. My father stood up slowly, hooking his thumbs into the belt loops of his expensive trousers. He puffed out his chest, projecting his voice so every single relative in the dining room could hear him clearly. "Well, look who finally decided to join the family reunion," Richard announced, his voice dripping with condescending magnanimity. "I told you she would come to her senses, Susan. I told you she just needed a little time to cool off and realize how important family hospitality is." Susan let out a soft, theatrical sigh of relief, standing up next to him. She smoothed the front of her silk blouse and offered me a sickeningly sweet fake smile. "Allison, I am so glad you decided to stop acting like a petulant child. We were starting to worry we would actually have to follow through and cut you off. But you are here now, and that is what matters. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting loosely at my sides. I did not say a word. I just let them continue to dig the hole deeper, completely fascinated by the sheer depth of their arrogance. My father gestured broadly toward the extravagant buffet behind him, acting like a generous king, welcoming a banished peasant back into the kingdom. Go ahead and grab a plate, Allison. The smoked salmon is fantastic. But before you sit down with us, you need to walk over to the front desk. The concierge has been holding these rooms on a temporary authorization. Tell the manager you are my daughter, give them your platinum card to cover the total balance for the week, and apologize for the delay. Once that bill is settled, you can come back here and apologize to your Aunt Diane and Uncle Greg for the stunt you pulled yesterday. The absolute silence in the dining room was deafening. 32 relatives were staring at me, waiting to see if I would bow my head and follow my father's humiliating orders. Todd finally looked up from his phone, a nervous, desperate glimmer of hope in his eyes, silently begging me to just pay the bill so his own financial lies would remain hidden from his wife. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I looked at the lavish breakfast spread, the crystal chandeliers, and the panoramic view of the lake. And then I let out a low, cold laugh that echoed sharply across the quiet room. My cold laugh echoed sharply across the quiet dining room. My father's triumphant, arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second, confusion flashing in his eyes. He had expected tears. He had expected me to hang my head in shame, defeated by the sheer social pressure of 32 staring relatives. He certainly did not expect me to laugh in his face. I did not sit down at his table. I did not grab a plate from the lavish buffet. I turned on my heel and walked directly out of the dining room, heading straight toward the main front desk in the grand lobby. My sudden departure broke the spell. I heard the frantic scraping of wooden chairs against the marble floor as Richard and Susan scrambled to their feet. Heavy footsteps echoed behind me as they rushed to catch up, completely panicked that their personal ATM was walking out the door. "Allison, get back here right now!" my father hissed, his voice dropping into a desperate, threatening whisper as he trailed closely behind me. "Stop making a scene. Walk up to the concierge and give them your card. Do not test me today." I ignored him entirely. I walked straight up to the polished mahogany front desk. A sharply dressed hotel manager with a gold name tag pinned to his lapel stepped forward to assist me. He offered a practiced, polite customer service smile. "Good morning," the manager said smoothly. "How can I help you today?" My father rushed up to the desk, sliding in right next to me, trying to physically crowd my space and assert his dominance. "She is here to settle the balance for the 8 premium lakeside suites under my name," Richard announced loudly, making sure the nearby guests heard him. "We had a slight issue with our temporary authorization yesterday, but my daughter is going to put her platinum card on file for the week." I did not look at my father. I kept my eyes locked directly on the hotel manager. I reached into my tailored blazer, pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper, and slid it across the mahogany counter. "Actually, I am here to do the exact opposite," I said, my voice perfectly calm and projected just loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "My name is Allison. Yesterday afternoon, those 2 individuals attempted to open a $25,000 line of credit through your hospitality financing department using my social security number. I did not authorize that application." The manager's polite smile vanished instantly. The practiced hospitality professional was replaced immediately by a man who realized his resort was in the middle of a massive financial liability. He picked up the piece of paper. "This is the official federal fraud report," I continued, pointing to the document. "And below that is the active criminal case number filed with the County Financial Crimes Division. The local police department has already subpoenaed your concierge logs and your lobby security footage." All the color completely drained from my father's face. His tan skin turned a sickly ashen gray. Susan let out a sharp, breathless gasp and covered her mouth with her hands, taking a terrified step backward. "Sir, this is a massive misunderstanding," Richard stammered, his voice cracking in panic. "My daughter is just confused. We were just trying to expedite the check in process." The manager ignored Richard completely. He looked at the police letterhead, read the federal case number, and immediately began typing furiously on his computer terminal. The clicking of his keyboard was the only sound in the tense, heavy air of the lobby. "Ma'am, our financing department did flag and automatically decline a credit application under your name yesterday afternoon." The manager stated, his voice dropping into a serious, uncompromising tone. "We have been holding these 8 suites on a temporary grace period, as this gentleman assured us a valid card would be presented this morning to clear the $28,000 balance." "There will be no valid card," I told him clearly. "They have absolutely no money. They are currently committing felony fraud against your hotel." The manager did not hesitate for a single second. He clicked his mouse 3 times with heavy final strikes. "I am immediately voiding the temporary authorizations," the manager announced, coldly looking directly at my father. "I am deactivating all 8 room keycards as of this exact moment. You and your entire party are no longer welcome at Azure Cove. Resort security will be escorting you to your rooms to collect your belongings, and you are to leave the premises immediately." "No, please, you cannot do this!" Susan cried out, her voice echoing shrilly across the marble lobby. "We have family here. We promised them a vacation." The commotion at the front desk had not gone unnoticed. Aunt Diane, Uncle Greg, and a massive wave of the extended family had abandoned their expensive breakfasts and crowded into the entryway of the lobby. 32 relatives stood in absolute shock, watching the wealthy, untouchable patriarch of the family get publicly evicted and accused of felony fraud. The grand illusion was shattering into a million pieces right before their eyes. Todd was standing near the back of the crowd, sweating profusely, chewing aggressively on his thumbnail. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an exit. But there was no exit, because this was the exact moment Jasmine made her move. Jasmine walked out of the dining room, her posture commanding, absolute and terrifying. She did not look like a woman who was suffering. She looked like a woman who was executing a hostile corporate takeover. As she approached, the crowd of relatives instinctively parted for her, stepping aside to let her pass. Todd saw his wife walking toward him and practically lunged forward, reaching his hands out, desperate to find a single ally in the collapsing room. "Jasmine, thank God," Todd pleaded, his voice shaking violently. "Tell them, please. Tell Uncle Greg and Aunt Diane that Allison is crazy. She is trying to ruin us." Jasmine did not even look at his outstretched hands. She stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. The entire lobby went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Jasmine unzipped her designer leather tote bag, reached inside, and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. Without a single word of hesitation, she slapped the envelope hard against Todd's chest, forcing him to grab it before it fell to the floor. "Those are divorce papers, Todd," Jasmine said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried effortlessly across the silent room, slicing through the air like a razor blade. "I had my attorney draft them late last night." She continued, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "You have exactly 24 hours to sign them and return them to his office. If you fight me on this, we are going to trial. And I promise you, with the forensic accounting evidence I compiled last night, I will leave you with absolutely nothing but the clothes currently on your back." Todd stumbled backward, clutching the manila envelope like it was highly radioactive. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Jasmine, please, we can talk about this in private." He finally begged, his eyes darting frantically to the 32 relatives who were now staring at him in sheer horror. "Do not do this here. Not in front of everyone." "There is no more private, Todd," Jasmine fired back, her voice ringing out like a judge delivering a final sentence. "Your entire life is a public performance, so we are going to end it right here on the main stage." Jasmine turned her body slightly, ensuring every single aunt, uncle, and cousin could hear her perfectly. She looked directly at Aunt Diane, who was standing frozen with her hand over her heart. "For 5 years, my husband told me he was a successful real estate investor," Jasmine announced to the crowd, her tone surgical and merciless. "He told me he bought the beautiful lake house you were all supposed to stay at this week. He told me he was building our financial future. But he was lying. He never owned that house. Allison bought it entirely on her own." Uncle Greg gasped loudly. The whispers among the cousins erupted instantly. But Jasmine was not done. She took a step closer to Todd, her eyes burning with a fierce protective rage that made him shrink away from her. I audited our joint bank accounts last night, she continued, her voice growing louder, commanding the complete attention of the room. I discovered that over the last 3 years, Todd stole $52,000 of my corporate salary. He took my money and secretly funneled it to his parents so they could keep up their pathetic, fake country club lifestyle. My father tried to speak, tried to interject and save his golden boy, but the hotel security guards had already arrived and stepped between him and the crowd, forcing him to stay silent. And do you want to know the absolute worst part? Jasmine demanded, pointing a manicured finger directly at Todd's chest. Yesterday, when he realized Allison had locked him out of her property and he realized his parents could not afford this luxury hotel, he panicked. He knew they needed a massive amount of cash to keep this family reunion charade going. So my husband logged into our banking portal and transferred $15,000 out of our 3-year-old daughter's college savings account. A collective horrified shriek ripped through the crowd of relatives. Stealing from a spouse was terrible. Stealing from a toddler's college fund to pay for a fake luxury vacation was an unforgivable, sickening betrayal. Todd fell to his knees right there on the marble floor. He dropped the divorce papers, buried his face in his hands, and began sobbing loudly, completely broken. Jasmine looked down at him with absolute pure disgust. "Do not ever contact me again," she said coldly. "My lawyer will handle the rest." She turned around, adjusted the strap of her tote bag on her shoulder, and walked straight through the crowd of relatives. Nobody said a word. They just watched her walk out the heavy glass doors of the resort, leaving absolute devastation in her wake. I stood at the concierge desk, watching the scene unfold with profound satisfaction. The golden child was weeping on the floor. The wealthy patriarch was being surrounded by hotel security. The illusion was dead, but the mourning was not over yet, and the final domino was just about to fall. The heavy glass doors of the resort slid shut behind Jasmine, sealing the grand lobby in a suffocating absolute silence. The only sound echoing across the polished marble floor was the pathetic, ragged gasping of my brother Todd, who was still slumped on his knees, clutching his divorce papers. 32 extended relatives stood completely frozen in a massive semicircle, their faces pale and their eyes wide with shock. The pristine image of the perfect wealthy family they had worshipped for decades had just been violently dismantled in under 5 minutes. My father stood near the center of the lobby, his chest heaving. The hotel security guards had taken a step back, sensing that the immediate threat of physical violence had passed, but they remained vigilant. Richard looked down at his golden boy weeping on the floor, then looked at the horrified faces of his brother, his sister, and his nieces and nephews. The absolute humiliation of the moment was too much for his massive, fragile ego to process. He could not accept that he was the villain of this story. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to absorb his rage. His head snapped up, and his eyes locked onto me, standing calmly next to the concierge desk. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. The carefully manicured facade of the benevolent patriarch completely dissolved, revealing the vicious, desperate bully underneath. He took a heavy step toward me, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "You did this!" he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You planned this entire thing. You poisoned Jasmine's mind with your bitter, jealous lies. You embarrassed your brother. You humiliated your mother and me in front of our own family. You are a sick, twisted girl." I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I stood perfectly still, watching him unravel. The hotel manager shifted nervously beside me, reaching for his radio, but I held up a single hand to stop him. I wanted Richard to say everything he needed to say. I wanted him to empty his entire arsenal. "You think you are so smart because you bought a little house by the lake?" my father screamed, pacing back and forth in front of the crowd. "You think you can treat us like garbage? Well, you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, Allison. If you want to play hardball, we will play hardball." Susan stepped up behind him, her face streaked with ruined makeup, nodding vigorously as she tried to salvage whatever scrap of authority they had left. "Tell her, Richard," she hissed. "Tell her she is done. I am completely disinheriting you." my father bellowed, making sure every single relative in the lobby could hear his ultimate threat. As soon as I get back to Chicago, I am calling my estate lawyer. I am writing you completely out of my will. You will not see a single penny of my savings. You will not get a single piece of the family trust. And when your mother and I pass away, you will not get a single brick of the suburban house. It is all going to Todd. You are dead to us, Allison. You get absolutely nothing. He stood there panting heavily, his chest puffed out, waiting for the impact. For 35 years, the threat of being cut out of the family and losing my inheritance was the ultimate weapon they used to control me. It was the invisible chain they wrapped around my neck to ensure I always complied, always paid their debts, and always submitted to their demands. They genuinely expected me to break down crying, to fall to my knees next to Todd, and beg them to reconsider. Instead, a strange, bubbling sensation rose in my chest. It traveled up my throat, broke past my lips, and emerged into the quiet lobby as a genuine, uncontrollable laugh. I threw my head back and laughed. It was not a bitter, sarcastic chuckle. It was a deep, resonant laugh of absolute, pure amusement. My father recoiled as if I had physically slapped him. "What is so funny?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, confused growl. "You think being cut out of a multi-million-dollar estate is funny?" I took a slow, deep breath, wiping a single tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. I stepped away from the mahogany desk and walked directly toward him, stopping just a few feet away. I looked him dead in the eyes, stripping away the final layer of his magnificent delusion. "Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly and carrying effortlessly across the marble room, "you do not have a multi-million-dollar estate. You do not have a family trust. You do not even have a savings account. You have been completely broke for 3 years." The entire crowd of relatives gasped in unison. Uncle Greg took a sharp step forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. My father's face turned a shade of sickly, transparent white. "You shut your mouth," he stammered, pointing his finger inches from my face. "Do not lie to this family." "I am not lying, and you know it," I replied coldly. 3 years ago, you lost your primary sales contracts. You told everyone you were taking an early retirement to focus on investments. But the truth is, you were fired and you had absolutely nothing saved. You maxed out your credit cards to keep paying your country club dues. You let Todd steal $52,000 from his own wife to pay for your luxury car leases and your expensive dinners. You are a complete and total financial fraud. Susan let out a loud, wailing sob, burying her face in her hands. She knew it was true. She knew the secret was finally out. But I am not done. Dad. I continued, closing the distance between us until I was looking slightly down into his terrified eyes. Let us talk about that beautiful suburban house you just threatened to cut me out of. The house you think gives you so much power. Do you remember when you received those pre-foreclosure notices from the county treasurer 2 years ago? Richard stopped breathing. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. His mouth hung open in absolute paralyzed shock. "You were $40,000 behind on your property taxes," I explained, my words falling like heavy hammer strikes in the silent lobby. "The bank was exactly 30 days away from seizing the property and evicting you and Mom onto the street. But then, miraculously, a blind legal trust stepped in and paid the entire delinquent balance in full, and that same trust has been paying your quarterly property taxes ever since." I paused, letting the reality of the situation completely saturate his mind. I watched the gears turning in his head as he desperately tried to connect the dots. "You thought you got lucky," I said softly. "You thought some clerical error saved you, or some anonymous wealthy benefactor took pity on you. You never bothered to ask questions because you were just relieved you did not have to sell your precious house and admit to your rich friends that you were bankrupt." I tilted my head, offering him a cold, surgical smile. "That blind trust belongs to me, Dad." A sharp collective intake of breath echoed from the 32 relatives standing behind him. Aunt Diane literally had to lean against a marble pillar to keep her balance. "I am the one who saved your house," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "I paid the $40,000 delinquency with the overtime money I earned working night shifts in the trauma ward." I paid your quarterly taxes for the last 2 years. I did not do it because I love you. I did it because I knew if the bank evicted you, you would show up on my doorstep demanding to live with me, and I would rather burn my own money than let you back into my daily life. Richard looked like he was going to vomit. His entire body began to tremble. The man who had spent his entire life trying to dominate his daughter suddenly realized he had been surviving solely on her secret charity. But here is the ultimate payoff, Dad, I said, dropping my voice to a lethal quiet register. When you tried to steal my identity yesterday to pay for this luxury resort, you crossed the final line. So as of 8 o'clock this morning, I called my attorney. I formally dissolved the blind trust. I canceled the property tax autopay. I stepped back, surveying the absolute ruin of the man standing before me. The county treasurer will be sending you the new tax bill next week, I announced. And since Todd is about to be completely wiped out in divorce court, he will not be able to steal from Jasmine to save you this time. You are going to lose the house. You are going to lose the cars. You are going to lose everything. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. There were no more threats. There was no more yelling. My father stood frozen, utterly destroyed by the sheer magnitude of the truth. Uncle Greg finally broke the silence. He walked past my father, his face contorted with absolute disgust. "You make me sick, Richard," Greg spat. "You lied to us. You stole from a baby's college fund, and you treated the only person who actually helped you like absolute garbage." Greg turned to the rest of the family. "Pack your bags, everyone. We are leaving. We will find a cheap motel on the highway and drive home tomorrow. I am not spending another second looking at this man." The crowd of relatives immediately turned their backs on my parents. They began walking quickly toward the elevators and the front doors, completely abandoning the wealthy patriarch they had respected just an hour prior. I looked at my mother, who was currently sitting on a luxury lobby sofa, crying hysterically into her hands. I looked at Todd, who was still paralyzed on the marble floor. And I looked at my father, who was staring blankly at the wall, a hollow, empty shell of a man. I did not feel sorry for them. I felt absolutely nothing but the pure, clean air of total liberation. I turned around, offered a polite nod to the hotel manager, and began walking toward the main exit. But just as I reached the heavy glass doors, the flashing red and blue lights of 3 county sheriff cruisers suddenly pulled into the circular driveway, their sirens completely cutting through the peaceful morning air. The final consequence had arrived. The heavy glass doors of the resort slid open, and the chaotic flashing of red and blue lights spilled across the pristine marble floor. 3 uniformed county deputies stepped into the lobby, moving with urgent, coordinated precision. They were led by a tall, stern man in a crisp gray suit, who I immediately recognized from his voice on the phone the night before. It was Detective Lawson from the Financial Crimes Division. He did not look like a man who was there to negotiate a family misunderstanding. He looked like a man who had a stack of irrefutable digital evidence sitting on his desk and a judge's signature on a warrant. The hotel manager stepped out from behind the polished mahogany counter, pointing a single shaking finger directly at my parents standing near the center of the lobby. Detective Lawson walked straight toward my father, his gold badge clearly visible on his belt. Richard tried to straighten his posture desperately, attempting to summon the arrogant, wealthy patriarch persona one last time, but his knees were practically buckling beneath him. His face was a sickly ashen gray, and his hands were trembling so violently he had to press them against his sides. Richard and Susan the detective said, his deep voice echoing in the dead silence of the lobby. "We need you to step away from the crowd. You are being detained in connection with a felony identity theft and credit fraud investigation." My father opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. The bluster, the threats, and the towering ego were entirely gone, completely vaporized by the reality of law enforcement standing inches away from him. Susan, however, completely lost whatever fragile grip she still had on reality. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of the detective's suit jacket. "You cannot arrest us!" she wailed, tears streaming down her face, her voice reaching a shrill, hysterical pitch. "We belong to the Oak Ridge Country Club. We are good people. This is just a family dispute. My daughter is lying to you because she is jealous of her brother." The detective did not even blink. He calmly unpeeled her fingers from his jacket with cold, practiced professionalism. Ma'am, your daughter provided the exact tax documents you stole from her, and this hotel provided the exact timestamp and digital signature of your fraudulent application. Lawson stated, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. You attempted to open a $25,000 line of credit using a stolen Social Security number. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. They did not force them to the ground, sparing them that single shred of dignity, only because they did not physically resist. But the escort out of the building was worse than any physical restraint. Two uniformed deputies flanked my father, and one walked closely behind my mother, holding her firmly by the arm, as she continued to sob uncontrollably. They were marched across the grand lobby past the crystal chandeliers and past the extravagant breakfast buffet they could never afford. I stood near the main exit, perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in the pockets of my tailored trousers. As they walked past me, my father did not look up. His eyes were fixed firmly on the polished marble floor, utterly defeated. But my mother locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second. There was no anger left in her gaze, no manipulative calculation. There was only a hollow, terrifying realization that she had finally met a consequence she could not manipulate her way out of. The heavy glass doors closed behind the police escort, and the flashing lights of the cruisers illuminated their figures as they were placed into the back seats of the patrol cars. Inside the lobby, a new, entirely different wave of panic swept through the 32 extended relatives. The initial shock of watching the family patriarch get arrested was abruptly replaced by a terrifying, immediate financial realization. Aunt Diane gripped Uncle Greg's arm, her face turning a sickly shade of green. "Greg," she whispered frantically, her voice carrying in the quiet room, "if Richard is completely broke and going to jail, who is paying for all these premium rooms? Who is paying for that massive catered breakfast buffet we just ate?" I put my own credit card down at the front desk for room incidentals. They are going to charge me for everything. That single sentence acted like a starter pistol in a crowded theater. The illusion of a free luxury vacation was officially dead, replaced by the terrifying threat of a massive hospitality bill. Uncle Greg did not hesitate. Nobody talked to the front desk. He ordered the family in a harsh, urgent whisper, acting like a general organizing a military evacuation. "Go straight to your rooms right now. Grab your bags, do not take anything from the minibars, and get to the parking garage as fast as you can. We are leaving before that manager figures out how to put this bill on our cards." It was a complete and total stampede. Uncles, aunts, and cousins abandoned their plates of expensive food, dropping their linen napkins on the floor. They scrambled toward the guest elevators, pushing past each other in a desperate frenzy to pack their bags and escape the blast radius of my parents' lies. The loyalty they had shown my father 10 minutes ago completely evaporated the moment their own wallets were threatened. Amidst the absolute chaos of the fleeing family, one person remained entirely stationary: my brother Todd. He had managed to crawl off the marble floor and slump into one of the velvet dining chairs at the abandoned breakfast table. He was holding the thick manila envelope containing his divorce papers tightly against his chest, staring blankly at the wall. The golden child, the man who had stolen $52,000 from his own wife to fund his parents' delusions, was now utterly alone. His parents were sitting in the back of a police cruiser. His extended family was actively running away from him, and he had absolutely no money, no property, and no future left to manipulate. I looked through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the lobby, watching the circular driveway outside. Jasmine was standing calmly by the valet stand. She handed the attendant her ticket, tipped him generously with crisp cash, and waited patiently as he brought her sleek black luxury sedan to the front. She did not look back at the hotel. She did not look back through the glass at the dining room where her husband was sitting in absolute ruin. She simply opened her car door, slid into the driver's seat, and drove away down the winding resort road, disappearing into the bright morning sun. She was leaving with her highly successful career, her self-respect, and a watertight forensic accounting file that was going to secure her absolute financial freedom in divorce court. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh lilies and expensive coffee filling my lungs. The entire fake empire had completely collapsed in less than an hour. Every single lie had been exposed, every stolen dollar accounted for, and every toxic boundary violator properly dealt with. I adjusted the lapel of my tailored black blazer, feeling a profound quiet strength radiating through my bones. I had walked into this hotel as the family scapegoat, but I was walking out as the only person who actually owned her own life.